and welcome to the COP30 Newsroom here at High House, live from the COP site in Belem, Brazil. Every morning, we'll be bringing you behind the scenes on the biggest stories of the day with a selection of the best climate journalists in the world. To kick us off on our first show, on the first morning of COP, I'm delighted to be joined by Jessie Chase-Lubitz, Global Development Reporter at DevEx, Brian Bachu, anchor at CNC3 in Trinidad and Tobago, and Jennifer Morgan, who was Germany's climate envoy and previously the head of Greenpeace International, a real COP insider who knows exactly how COP pans out in the news. So welcome everybody to the show. Wonderful to have you here. I think to kick us off today, a quick reaction, please, to our first story, which has been chosen by the production team. It's from AFP. It says that the Amazon will host the toughest climate talks in years. Jennifer, let's start with you for your reaction. You've been involved in climate talks for many, many years. Are these the toughest talks in years?
Yeah, I've been to all the COPs now, and I think this is geopolitically the toughest one. And from a perspective of the phase of the COPs, because it's moving more into having to raise ambition but accelerate the implementation across the board. And, you know, the Brazilians have a tough job. But I think, yeah, so we're seeing, you know, with the Trump administration, a very active Trump administration, much more than the last time the U.S. pulled out. It means, okay, how do we bring all these different actors together? That's complicated and hard.
Yeah. Ryan?
I think so. I think geopolitically it's one of the most important issues that will face this COP. This COP comes really a decade after we had that major agreement in Paris. And we've seen how off course we are. But it's not the first reality check that we've had. 2 years ago in Dubai, when the first global stock take was taken, that was the first real siren. That was the first real alarm bells. And because the world now is so off course, I think world leaders are under pressure. But you also made a very good point. Not all of the world is on the same side as it was 2 years ago. Geopolitically, things have shifted a lot, particularly to the right, and that's going to have a major impact on these talks.
Jessie?
Yeah, I completely agree on the geopolitical point. It's very complicated. There's also overall potentially less will to push climate action forward. But I will say, topically, I feel like it might not be the most complicated. You don't have this big financial number we have to agree to like we did last year. You've got a lot of different bits and pieces that different groups can get behind and try to push forward. All these climate action plans, just the idea that this is an implementation COP, it might be kind of complicated to follow from a journalistic perspective, but I do think we'll be able to see where success is happening a little bit more clearly. Whereas last year, it was very, very narrow focus. We want to get a certain amount for the NCQG. We don't have that big headline number this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, let's dig into that agenda a little bit more with what Jennifer has chosen for us. She's picked out the call of Belem for climate, which was issued by President Lula a couple of days ago, really setting out the presidency's agenda here. Jennifer, what did you think when you saw this?
Well, I thought, okay, here's President Lula giving countries a bit of an outline of all of the different things that need to occur, and charting, in a way, saying, okay, here's your mandate, team. You go and you sort this out, and his presidency team with Ambassador Delago and Anatoni to make that happen. I think what struck me is indeed these dual realities that we have, that we are far off track of where we need to go, but at the same time, 10 years after Paris, we have a pretty positive foundation. You know, if you look at at least the clean energy transition, 15 times faster, you know, on the solar side, every fifth car is an electric vehicle. It was 1 in 100 before. You're starting to see those benefits, but it's clear that we're off track. So I think looking at that call gives us an outline. I would say I'd pull out certainly the adaptation issue here, how we're going to accelerate the implementation of the transition away from fossil fuels. This is absolutely essential that we can get signals at the end, and it's already been a bit of a forest nature COP, getting those funds, supporting countries to keep their forests standing. But we need the roadmap to close the gap to 1.5 because these national plans, they're not adding up yet.
Absolutely. And, it's one of the things about this COP is the presidency's called it the implementation COP. Like Jesse's saying, there's no big sort of number on the table like in Baku last year, for example. What do you make of that in terms of the negotiations, Jennifer? How does that make things different?
I think it could smooth things out a bit. I think it does make it harder from a media perspective because it's going to be, you kind of have to think of it as proof points, I think. You have to look at what did the leaders say, which decisions have been done to show multilateralism works, and then what are the proof points to say, okay, they are moving faster on reducing deforestation, they are moving faster on transitioning away, they are moving on the adaptation piece, and the money, especially for adaptation. I agree, last year was different with a new collective quantified goal, but this year we need to see countries moving forward. Wealthy, all that are able to do so, not only developed countries, that was the deal last year, need to come forward. So hopefully we'll see this morning that countries have decided, okay, we're going to move forward and get going.
I think that in 2 weeks, this COP is going to be judged very, very hardly. This has to be an implementation COP. And particularly, we're talking about global north countries. I'm not sure if you had the opportunity to read what Tiana Figueres wrote. She wrote an op-ed in The Economist last week in the build-up to COP. And she started pointing to G20 countries as opposed to global north countries. And that's an important point, because if we're going to really implement what is happening, it's going to have to be that select group of countries pushing. And that's what we've not seen. We talk about the great advancements we've made in terms of electric vehicles. And yes, COPs work. COPs work. It's a fact. It works. However, Reuters news agency had a very interesting story yesterday where they looked back on 3 decades of COPs, and it showed that greenhouse gas emissions have actually tripled in that time, and the use of fossil fuels. So, this has to, I think in 2 weeks, when we're all packing up to leave, this COP will be judged very, very hard on what is actually the outcome of it. Perhaps even harder than Baku, Dubai, and Egypt.
Yeah. Jesse?
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I just think it's going to be so hard to judge that, way harder than it was last year. And I think we're going to rely a lot on even like civil society groups and stuff that are following each individual action plan, right? They're all coming out in these action plans. And I think there's a fear that, plans still aren't implementation. What does an implementation actually mean? What is the financial commitment to each thing? And what time period does that financial commitment need to be made? I think there's a lot of details, and it's just going to be a lot more work because it's not every journalist, focusing on the NCQG. It's every single action plan needing a team of journalists and civil society and everybody else to break down what the real path and the timeline for that path is towards implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, let's pick up, Jesse, with your story that you've chosen for us. This is one that you're writing about. I think it's not in print yet, so the audience get a preview. This is looking at Brazil's lithium boom, but tell us the story.
Yeah. So it's still being written at this point, but I was told about a small village in northeastern Brazil that had a lithium mine built there over the last 8 or so years, 7, 8 years. And it's just had, really negative impacts on the livelihoods of these people and the health of these people. And so I started looking into what the kind of future of these mines are. And Brazil has really, since 2021, really kind of pushed exploration of lithium and other mines as well, other metal mines as well, because they do have a lot of it here, and so it's beneficial for the country. As I'm sure everybody knows, lithium's essential for the renewable energy transition. So it's kind of an interesting catch-22 of we need these metals to phase away from fossil fuels, but the mine themselves, the local impact of these mines are really negative for the population. The just transition is a big part of this COP. I don't know exactly how much critical minerals are going to feature in the exact negotiations. I don't even really know if this is something that will be an international negotiation or if this is more of a domestic issue. But I'm hoping to follow that a little bit more over the course of these 2 weeks. and better understand kind of what can be done on an international level to safeguard the communities that are being put at risk as a result of the renewable energy transition.
Yeah, Jennifer.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely critical. And I think there are things that the international community can do. I think, getting a set of criteria and standards and then a process to actually observe and report on that and getting some positive examples. Because otherwise, it's just a similar form of extractivism that's been happening on fossil fuels, happening to local communities on these critical minerals. So there are different initiatives underway, but I think they need to be stepped up. And we need to have the local communities, the human rights violations, and the environment piece part of that, and then show this is how to do it, and then hold others accountable.
Yeah.
Oh, no, sorry, Jessie.
Sorry, just to kind of add to that. I mean, it's also a financial question of who's benefiting from selling all these critical minerals. The states are, right? But how is that money trickling down into the communities? Is it from at least the locals that I spoke to? No, the answer is no. They might get some jobs at the mines, but yeah, there are lots of ways to improve this and still keep the renewable energy transition going. It's not an either or situation. But
I think that a critical part that Jennifer would have mentioned would have been the communities. Civil society has a huge role to play if this is to get over the line. There's been a lack of conscience by the extractive industries in how they've gone about this. And you're right in talking about it in a similar way to fossil fuels. You're very right, because it feels like that. But I think for this to really get over the line, the communities and the civil societies are going to have to really be the drivers behind this. And I really look forward to reading it.
Thank you.
Just an observation from anybody who wants to jump in on this one. I think it was, from a reporting point of view, one of the things that was a common theme in the last two COPs in both the UAE and Azerbaijan is that they were petrostates, countries with a very large oil and gas industry. Brazil also has a very large oil and gas industry, but it has not been a story in the same way. I don't know whether anyone has any thoughts on that.
Amazon.
Yeah.
I think the decision to bring it to this region has been a really well thought out one. For many ways. It's not just about moving it away from the cities that are so centered around fossil fuels, but also it gives the world an opportunity to focus on not so much the oil and gas that we've seen in the last three COPs, but also now to look at something more green. Something that's less of oil and gas. And I think that was a real crucial decision to bring the COP to Belem.
I have seen some coverage, of course, of the decision to enable or to start looking at drilling here.
The equatorial margin.
Right,
yeah.
exactly. And of course, that's of great concern. I think, therefore, what President Lula said on the week, last week of needing to move forward in that direction is key. However, I just want to say that all the oil and gas producing countries have to go forward at this together. Yeah. Right? So where is Australia? Where is Canada? Where is, of course, the United States? Where is Norway? Right? And so I think we need to see at this COP those countries coming forward and saying, okay, we get it. We agreed to have a transition away. This is what a just transition looks like. And then the consumer countries, a country like Germany, looking at, okay, well, this is how we're reducing our demand. And of course, it's not fair that countries that have already exploited a lot of the atmosphere with their exploration of oil and gas are now saying, some of them are saying, no, you can't do this. But we have to come together, mutual. We have to come together, bring all these different actors together. And Marina Silva's been a real champion on this here in Brazil.
Great. Well, look, I think that takes us really nicely to the second story chosen by the production team today, which is from The Guardian, picking up on the COP President Andrea Correa de Largo's comments. Rich countries have lost enthusiasm for tackling the climate crisis, says COP30 chief. Ryan, I know you were very keen to talk on this one.
That's a really interesting story for more than one reasons, but more so when we look around what's happening geopolitically and the shifts geopolitically, you can sort of understand the basis for that statement. You look at what's happening in parts of South America. I mean, obviously, the United States is the big one in all of this. You look at parts of Europe. And so it's really gone with the wind. The wind has shifted in that direction, and so has the zeal for these UN climate change conferences. I did not find it, and I could be wrong, usually I am, but I did not find it coincidental that a week before COP, Bill Gates said what he said last week. I did not find, I mean, I'm very interested to hear your perspective. You're such a veteran in this, but I did not find that one bit coincidental.
No, I didn't either. I mean, I think this statement, I would differentiate it slightly. I mean, I may say this, I live in Germany, it is, I think the media wants to write the story that nobody cares about climate anymore, but there's still polls that show that 80% of people want action.
Yeah.
They may be more vocal about war if you're sitting in, in Europe on the border from the Russian war of aggression, or the inflation problems, or the debt issues that are in countries. But I think what I would say is within rich countries, and that's a big group. I agree with you on the G20. That's where the really action is. That you see a Europe that is still moving forward, it's stating its intent. It could have been stronger, but that 90% target is important, and we need to get it to the upper edge of the range they put in for their NDC. And many European leaders came. If you look at which leaders and heads of state came, many of them were from Europe. To me, that was a good sign that there's still ownership there for the agenda. But clearly, you need to have others coming in, and you see the opportunity. Then I'll shut. I think the Chinese opportunity in the clean energy economy, and now how others are competing for that, that's driving a lot of the action, and that's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a really good point. I think it's really important I mean, a lot of media that is in English language media is so focused on the U.S. And we've seen at like the UN General Assembly in September, President Trump came out and he talked about how horrible climate was, and we know how he feels about that. And then the next day, you had all these countries come together and announce, at least announce their NDCs. I know that ambition there hasn't been great, but you did see a sense of real interest in staying strong on climate. And so it's not all rich countries. I also just wanted to point out the Tropical Forest Forever facility just a couple days ago was operationalized. Norway put $3 billion down with some specifications, obviously, but that was a show of a huge amount of commitment from a rich country. And so I think it's not. We still need political will, and there's been ways in which this has really slowed, but there are examples of a lot of that.
And on Bill Gates, I agree with you, but I get my science from scientists. I don't need a billionaire to tell me whether it's urgent or not. And of course, human welfare should be at the center, but that's not new. That's not new. So
I agree with you. My one thing is he has such influence, such reach, that his words have power. And that was my only concern about him saying that virtually at the doorstep of COP30.
Yeah. Well, look, I think this leads quite neatly onto the final one from our production team today. We are looking at a Politico headline: Trump's COP30 stub thrusts Europe into a role it's not ready for. Jennifer, I can see you nodding your head slightly here. Tell us more.
I mean, I think that Europe, look, the only reason we've made progress for 30 years is when the European Union has worked together with the alliance of small island states, led by them, to get outcomes to occur, to push it as far as it possibly can and able to get an agreement that has consensus, right? Yeah. And I think that certainly Europe would like to have the United States on board. And is it between a rock and a hard place? I mean, the reason why the NDC context is important to see is you've got tariffs coming in on steel on one side, you've got steel coming in from China on the other side, trying to, and so within that context, I think it's ready for it. I think, though, the pressures are higher because Europe is really in deep implementation now. When you start talking about what heat pump you put in somebody's house, how you drive your car, it's very different than just saying, oh, we're going to throw a whole lot of money at this and move technology forward. Yeah. So I think Europe needs to demonstrate in these 2 weeks that it can build those coalitions. Yeah. But I think, let's see. Yeah. Let's see.
Tell us a little bit, Jennifer, about where you think we are with the EU as a bloc, because there are some tough conversations going on between different member states here. How do you think the EU is as a bloc coming into this COP?
I think the EU is more diverse than ever. I think you see the geopolitics, having just seen Orban sitting at the White House. That's the EU. But I think you see a very committed President von der Leyen, who's still moving this issue, and Vice President Ribera. But like I said, it's more into the implementation. You see also with the shift to the right, the polarization that's occurred, you see, sorry, but the fossil fuel industry coming in and trying to take advantage of that and build loopholes and weakening points into those directives. And that's what we have to keep our eye on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do want to add that point of AOSIS and the European Union forming that alliance of sort has been very key, not just for the EU's agenda, but also for the alliance of small island states. And I'm from a small island state, as everybody knows. Looking on from the outside to the EU, and this is my very personal experience over the last month, reading in the international press that the EU has delayed submitting its NDCs and it's kept being delayed and pushed back. And I'm looking on, me as a journalist who covers climate change, I'm looking on and I'm saying, come on, guys, what's next? What are we doing? And the only reason I'm saying that is because I'm from a small island state. The people that I talk about in stories are from small island states. And we know that the next block of nations we have to look to is the European Union, because we already understand as of November 6th last year that there is not the United States that we can lean on or look towards. And so from a small island state perspective, not just in the Caribbean, but from Pacific countries, others in Latin America as well, they're looking towards the EU for leadership. They're looking, I'm telling you.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, look, let's stay on small island states. Ryan, let's look at your story, our last story of the day. This is a piece you've written, The Caribbean urged to quantify non-economic loss and damage from climate change. Tell us about this.
Two important things happened in the last 2 years in the Caribbean. One was called Beryl, and that came extraordinarily early in the hurricane season. In fact, it might have been historically the first Category 5 hurricane in a long time, so early in the hurricane season. This year, someone called Melissa showed up very late. In fact, we thought that we were pretty much walking out of the hurricane season unscathed. Melissa came and did havoc across Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba, the Bahamas. And what the conversation that's now happening in the Caribbean is, how do we now quantify the non-economic damage that happens in these natural disasters? And it's a conversation that hasn't gotten fast or very far, but it's a conversation that's happening. There was a new report that came out calling for that non-economic loss and damage to now be quantified, and they want to bring it in a room like this. They want to bring it at COP30 and say, lay it down for the international community to say, we're ready for this.
Jesse.
It's a fascinating idea. I'd love to read your story. I've reported on sort of the insurance question when it comes to small island states, and the idea of parametric insurance, which is, a big word to basically say that we're going to pay out based on the disaster rather than the damage. And that's been questionable. It's sort of hard to model exactly how bad damage is going to be, and therefore the coverage isn't always perfect. But I believe in Melissa, at least, it's going to pay out. But that's very much the economic damage, and so I'm really interested to kind of learn more about kind of quantification and non-economic. That must be a very difficult topic.
Jennifer.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely critical. I mean, I worked really closely on the Loss and Damage Fund a couple of years ago, and spent time in the Caribbean and also in the Pacific. So the cultural heritage that is being lost. I mean, there was a project between Germany and the Archaeological Society and Tuvalu to do a digital documentation of their island. And I often talk about this in Germany because I think people have no sense. Like, imagine what it would be like if you could no longer visit your your loved ones in the graveyard because it doesn't exist anymore. That's just one small example. And so I think pushing that, bringing that forward, I think it also brings the heart and the ethics much more front and center.
Listen, fantastic. Thank you all very much. That's all we have time for today. A big thanks to all of our audience watching around the world, and again to our fantastic panel. Do keep watching the COP30 Newsroom. We'll be here every day for the duration of COP, bringing you behind the stories that really matter.